scripture reading is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verses 13 through 21, the parable of Jesus. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who sent me to be your judge or arbitrator?" And Jesus said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then Jesus told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do, for I have no place to store all my crops?" Then he said, "I'll do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones." And then he thought, "I will relax, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life is demanded of you, and the things you prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God."
Thank you, Ronnie, for that reading. My favorite thing to do is to pick texts that are sermons in and of themselves, because what much do you say after that, right? What else do you say? Our text today starts with a tale as old as time, a conflict between siblings over money. Who here knows someone who's gotten in a fight with their adult siblings, or maybe stopped speaking to their adult siblings because of conflicts over money or inheritance? It happens pretty often. Forbes says that in a survey of 2,700 Americans between the ages of 25 and 70, they estimate that roughly 15% of siblings have conflicts over money. And when they fight over finances, it's usually about their parents. And when they do fight, the main thing that drives them apart are how an inheritance is divided and whether the parents are being fair in their financial support of their children. This is not surprising, given that inheritances are and always have been crucial components of gaining and maintaining wealth within our human societies. Depending on the economic status of the family someone grew up in, many people spend a lot of their lives thinking about and planning for what they might inherit someday from loved ones. There's hardly any family drama that can trump relatives fighting over estate assets, right? I think I have a few lawyers here who can probably attest to that. This isn't the first time that Jesus deals with the topic of inheritance between brothers. There's the more well-known parable of the prodigal son, where one son decides to take his inheritance early and squander it, and is forced to return to his family and plead for their mercy. In both cases, Jesus makes his beliefs well known. Such material matters are not of great importance to him. In the case of the prodigal son, what mattered most was a parent's unconditional love for their child and the joy that the father feels when his long-lost child returns home. Money is trivial in this scenario. Likewise, in this interaction, Jesus doesn't want to get into the weeds of someone else's finances. He has no interest in being the arbitrator of this family conflict. His concern is not for the man's material wealth, but rather he warns him not to let greed and a love of material possessions corrupt his soul. To further drive his point home, Jesus tells the parable, often known as the parable of the rich fool, someone who might be touted as an innovative businessman in other sectors of society, but not to Jesus. He makes sure to refer to him as a rich man, letting us know he's someone who already has plenty of wealth and possessions. When the rich man's land turns out a more bountiful harvest than expected, he has so much grain that his existing barn is not large enough to store it all. So he does what any good businessman would do. He decides to tear down the old barn, or in our visual art here, to have his workers tear down the old barn and build a bigger one, so he will have a place to store the excess. This way, he can ensure that he'll be living the dream, and hopefully after this one harvest not have to worry about money anymore, right? He'll get to eat, drink, and be merry for the rest of his days. But God rebukes him in this story as a fool, because like for all of us, we never know when our time will come. It could be 50 years from now, or it could be much sooner. And what good will all that excess do for the rich man then? The rich fool in the story is far from unique. Throughout much of human history, many of us who are lucky enough to have an excess of resources in the first place have developed this tendency to want to hoard them rather than to distribute the surplus among others in our communities. Most of the time, it's not out of explicit feelings of greed, but rather a perceived sense of scarcity. We have to save up for a rainy day, or we have to put that thing aside that we don't really use and not give it away because one day we might need it. In the United States, a place where we have more collective wealth than the world has ever seen, this is a particularly noticeable phenomenon. One place this is the most glaringly obvious is, in the last few decades, the explosion of the storage unit industry. In the last few years, it has ballooned to a nearly $4 billion industry. And not to discount the fact that there can be a variety of good reasons someone may need one. It's common people will rent one when they are facing housing instability, family crisis, divorce, illness. But there's also a whole other sector of people who have them for one very simple reason. They have more stuff than they're able to store in their living spaces. In some ways, like the rich landowner. And a whole other subset of people eventually abandon these units and all that's inside of them, either out of willful indifference, or because sometimes they simply forget about them. One company estimated that around 155,000 abandoned units get auctioned off to the highest bidder every year. It's so common they have a whole reality show about it called Storage Wars. It's true. Sometimes the items recovered in these auctions are relatively worthless, while others are shockingly valuable. James Bond's submarine car from The Spy Who Loved Me was found in a storage locker on Long Island in 1989. The unit was bought at auction for $100, and the restored car was later sold for just shy of $1 million. The very first Superman comic, Action Comic #1, worth $1 million, was found in a San Fernando, California storage unit. And when Paris Hilton didn't keep up with her storage unit payments, she lost items that would eventually net roughly $10 million. You're only left to wonder what kind of things are being stored in people's homes if these are the type of items getting thrown into the storage unit. And while many of us living in big cities might be forgiven for some of our overflow spaces, given that we have much smaller homes than the average American, the overall phenomenon in our country seems to suggest that we have more stuff than we've ever had before. Since World War II, the size of the average family living in one household has continued to shrink throughout time, while the average living space has continued to grow larger. An alluring new feature of the post-war suburbs was the personal garage, at one point built for the purpose of parking one's car in a covered and secure space. Those are also increasingly being used to store excess. 25% of people with two-car garages don't park in them at all. A third of Americans with two-car garages park only one car next to all the other stuff that they have stored in the garage. You get my point here. We have a lot of stuff, more than most of us will ever be able to use or sell. Some of us have storage areas for our things larger than the average living space of human beings in other countries. Like the rich man, we have to continuously think of new and creative ideas for housing it all. And what will happen to all of it once we're gone? As Jesus reminds us, you can't take it with you when you go. If we have children or nieces and nephews or other heirs, maybe they'll be lucky enough to argue over it, like the brother in our story whose question prompts this original scenario. Now, none of this is meant to be an individual indictment on any one person's personal spending or storage habits. We have all, in a consumer sense, engaged in practices that could be considered excessive or wasteful. But that's no surprise, since we live in a culture that encourages us to overconsume at every turn. Fast fashion tells us last season's items are out of style, and it's time to refresh our wardrobe again. Every couple years, we're talked into needing the newest technology, appliance, or vehicle, leaving the old things to be recycled or discarded. As I comment on these habits, I find myself just as guilty. There's a sudden rush that comes with ordering the newest item with just a flick of the fingertips. But the high of consumption is always pretty quickly followed by the crash of panic you receive when you get this new item home and realize that you don't have anywhere to put it. When you realize there's not an inch of space left in your closet for the new outfit you just bought. We're so overwhelmed with our clutter that there's now a whole nother industry dedicated to organizing and minimizing all that we have. Entire companies dedicated to the purpose of coming to your home and cleaning out all your junk and hauling it away. You might remember back to 2019 when the Netflix show Tidying Up with Marie Kondo was all the rage, and many of us became inspired to free ourselves of the clutter that we built up over the years. The show and these businesses are so successful because on some level there's a realization within all of us that these things don't make us happy. And on the contrary, an excess of things is more likely to make us feel trapped and overwhelmed. In extreme cases, it can become an actual sickness, one that may have affected you or someone you loved at some point. Stanford Medicine estimates that there's about 1 in 40 adults in the US who have a hoarding disorder, defined as being compelled to hold on to the majority of their belongings, even when doing so means severely cluttered surroundings that decrease their quality of life and jeopardize their safety. While this culture of overconsumption we're experiencing now is unique in its sheer scale and impact, the concept is certainly not new, as we see in today's parable. It is ingrained in our societal nature to not be satisfied with having just enough, but instead to feel anxiety around a perceived sense of scarcity that causes us to hoard more than we need. That is the exact tendency that Jesus calls out in the inheritance-obsessed brother and the hypothetical rich fool. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves but are not rich towards God. Those are the final words of our passage. What does it mean to be rich towards God rather than to store up treasures here on earth? It seems so silly to store up massive amounts of grain into a huge storage facility in a society where people are unimaginably poor and hungry. And yet, at the same time, it isn't too hard to imagine because this isn't so far off from today's lived reality. While I've focused a lot of time here on individual behaviors, this isn't to distract from the hoarding of resources at the institutional level, which is the biggest driver of greed and inequality. In the US, the top 1% holds roughly 30% of the nation's wealth, and the top 0.1% has about 13% of the nation's wealth. These numbers are likely to increase in the years to come because of a new bill that just passed that will make cuts to programs like SNAP and Medicaid in favor of tax cuts for this same 1%. We live in a system of inequality that as a whole makes none of us happy, even the ultra-rich. Studies have shown time and time again that a higher income creates a certain level of happiness, but with limits. To no surprise, people who don't have to stress over meeting their basic needs, those in the middle and upper middle classes, report higher levels of happiness than those in the lowest socioeconomic class. But once a person's salary reaches a certain amount, roughly around $100,000 a year, depending on where you live, happiness plateaus, and there is no longer a noticeable difference between the economic classes. Yet the phenomenon that we see among the ultra-rich, the millionaires and the billionaires, is what can only be described as an obsession with gaining more on top of the already unimaginable levels of wealth that they possess. One might wonder, if wealth makes someone so happy, why don't the rich ever seem content with what they have? Why does every corporation need to keep growing larger? Why must every multimillionaire CEO need to keep getting raises? Why are shareholders never fully satisfied with the profit margins? What does it mean to be rich towards God rather than to store up treasures on earth? Jesus made it clear that he had no concern for material wealth. While there are plenty of preachers in this country who will be happy to teach you the prosperity gospel that Jesus wants you to be rich, the Bible would suggest quite the opposite. Excessive wealth is not a sign of holiness, but rather a barrier that keeps us from the full experience of being one with God and one with our neighbors. It is famously Jesus who says that it is easier for a camel to enter the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to go to heaven. That one doesn't get quoted in churches as often as the ones about gays and women. I wonder why. Just saying. Well, it'd be easy for me to stand here and tell you that money is a completely trivial matter and that only matters of the spirit and morality should concern you. I have to acknowledge the realities and limitations of the world that we live in. A world where achieving a certain level of financial security is crucial in ensuring that your basic needs are met. But Jesus' words today are a great reminder that true joy does not and cannot come from amassing excess. Everything I've described this morning, from the absurdity of our storage units to the extreme hoarding of the wealthy, does not create a better, more just, or more joyful world. Our society does a wonderful job in convincing us that resources are scarce, and that at some point, unless we amass a ridiculous amount of something, we may be in danger of not having it someday. Look back to 2020, when the mere mention of a supply shortage had people fighting each other over the last pack of toilet paper. Our society does a good job of convincing us that one group getting their fair share means that there won't be enough for all of us. This is the type of ingrained ideology that leads us into harmful ways of thinking, ways that push us towards stinginess rather than generosity, ways that make us feel animosity towards our neighbors rather than hospitality. We buy into the lie that for everyone to get enough, that means we will have to give something up. But Jesus reminds us that these so-called treasures that we're storing up here on earth aren't treasures at all. When we hear someone has died, our first thought is never to think about how much money they were worth as they took their last breath, but rather what kind of life they lived. At their funerals, we talk about the people they loved and the contributions that they made to other people's lives and the well-beings of their community. A world where we all have enough is one in which we are in ultimate harmony with God and with each other. It is a world with significantly fewer acts of violence, where everyone is housed and no one is forced to sleep on the streets. A world where no one ever again suffers from a preventable disease or ailment. It is a world where no child, from New York City to Gaza, ever has to go hungry. We're told this world would come at such a great cost, but can you really put a price tag on living in a world full of the kind of justice and equality that our faith calls us towards? As much as we are attached to so many of our possessions and our conveniences, I think most of us would give up things like 2-day shipping in a heartbeat if it meant a guarantee of living in a world free of unnecessary atrocities. Whenever it's my time to go, I don't think I'll personally have to worry about monetary riches being the first thing people associate me with. It's not the, not the profession I chose. If so, we'd definitely have an elevator by now. But when it is my time to go, and the same wish goes for all of you, it's my hope that I'll feel like a rich person, not in money or material possessions, but rich in the love that I shared with others and with the community that surrounded me. Jesus condemns excessive wealth not for the sole purpose of indicting one single person, but for the purpose of steering us back on the right path to what's most truly important and life-giving. No amount of money or objects can ever make you feel whole. Contently accepting the world of excess and inequality we currently live in cannot make you feel whole either. We're called by our faith to create a better, more just world where no one has excess and everyone has enough. May we all be rich one day. Rich in our closeness to God, and rich in our love and care for one another. Amen.